How are you, students? This is grade 12 economics lesson provided by the Ministry of Education, Ethiopia. And today's lesson is on Unit 7, which is about macroeconomic reforms in Ethiopia. And this is the second lesson, and it is about an overview of homegrown economic reform in Ethiopia. Students, after the end of this lesson, you will be able to explain objectives of homegrown economic reform, identify the key priority areas of the homegrown economic reform, identify the key pillars of homegrown economic reform, and explain sectoral reforms of the homegrown economic reform. Students, let's revise the previous lesson first, which was about the National Development Plan and strategies of different regimes in Ethiopia. By the early 1950s, Emperor Haile Selassie I had renewed calls for a transition from a subsistence economy to an agro-industrial economy, and the then existing government planned 3 5-year economic development plans called the first 5-year National Development Plan, the second 5-year National Development Plan, and the third 5-year National Development Plan of the imperial regime. After the downfall of the imperial regime, the 1974 revolution by the Derg resulted in establishment of socialist state aimed at the nationalization and restructuring of the Ethiopian economy. And the Derg followed different socialist measures, and the economic system, the command economic system, changed the Ethiopian economy in different aspects. The Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, EPRDF's rise to power in 1991 resulted in a shift in national development strategies from the socialist-oriented or communist-oriented development of the Derg regime. Students, today's lesson is about the homegrown economy, the economy which was proposed after the reform in the year 2019-20. The homegrown economy emphasized local ownership solutions tailored to domestic needs and a departure from externally imposed or one-size-fits-all approach. Most of the Ethiopian national development plans which were proposed by the previous regimes before the reform were proposed by the Western and East Asian countries, which was based on their own cultures, which was based on their own local systems and language. And it was a one-size-fits-all approach, which is different from the Ethiopian context. When we see the characteristics and aspects of homegrown economy, it is locally conceived and driven. It was proposed by the local knowledge, by the local resources and wisdoms, and this homegrown economy is context specific. It is specifically by nations, particular nations, and it emphasizes on self-reliance, which is dependent on the available resource of a country. And the homegrown economy focus on domestic resources and capabilities, the ability to do the something, and prioritization of national interests. It is based on the interest of the people of a country, not by the interest of foreign countries or foreign financial institutions such as the IMF or the World Bank. And the gradual and adaptive approach is one of the benefits of this homegrown economy, and integration of local knowledge. It is based on local technology, local knowledge or wisdom of a country. Students, let's see the benefits of the homegrown economy which was launched after the year 2020 in Ethiopia. And one of the benefits is increased ownership and sustainability. The owners of the economy or the programs are the Ethiopians. So this is one of the advantages of the homegrown economy. And greater relevance and effectiveness is the other benefit of the homegrown economy. Enhanced national pride, because all the programs are launched by the Ethiopians for the Ethiopians, and this leads to the national pride and cohesion, and reduced dependence on and vulnerability. This homegrown economy is independent of foreign attitudes or perceptions or foreign institutions, hence it reduces dependence on foreign resources. And vulnerability, it reduces vulnerabilities. There is no shocks from external shocks, hence it reduces the vulnerability of external shocks because it's designed by domestic economy, and it's more inclusive. The fruits of the growth are more distributed evenly for the people. In the context of your current location, Ethiopia, the term homegrown economic agenda has been specifically used by the government to describe its own set of economic policies and strategies aimed at transforming Ethiopian economy. So we are going to see the homegrown economy, which was launched by the year 2019-20 in Ethiopia after the reform in this lesson. In the specific context of Ethiopia's homegrown economic agenda, the stated advantages include macroeconomic stability. One of the problems of economies nowadays is economic instability. That means the economies are more on pressure of inflation. Sometimes most economies are with the problem of higher unemployment rates. This is the macroeconomic instability. So one of the advantages of the homegrown economic agenda is bringing macroeconomic stability. The second one is rebalancing the public and private sector. Sometimes there is high ownership or contribution of the public sector in domestic economy than that of the private sector. So this homegrown economic reform is designed to rebalance this public and private sector contribution in an economy, unlocking the growth potential or taking advantage or assessing the potentials by domestic economy is the other benefit of the homegrown economic agenda. The other one is job creation. Mostly the foreign proposed plans were targeted on creating job opportunities for foreigners and their own resources, but the domestic or homegrown economic agendas are more relied on the job creation for domestic or local people. And finally, improved governance is the advantage of the homegrown economic agenda in Ethiopia. In the context of Ethiopia's homegrown economic agenda, these characteristics are evident in the emphasis on local policy formulation, not international, addressing specific macroeconomic imbalances and leveraging domestic resources and prioritizing job creation and inclusive growth based on Ethiopia's unique circumstances. In Ethiopia's homegrown economic agenda, there are some potential disadvantages. And among the disadvantages, there is difficulty in assessing foreign exchange, since domestically produced goods are produced using domestic sources of economy. It is difficult to get goods foreign exchange from abroad by boosting domestic exports. So this is the problem. And the other is its slow technology transfer. Since products are produced using domestic technology, domestic sources, and domestic labor forces, then it is difficult to get technology transfer from foreign. Hence, this is a disadvantage of the homegrown economic agenda. And the other one is challenge in competing globally. Since products are produced using domestic sources and resources, domestic technology and the domestic labor, is sometimes it leads to difficulty in competition with a well-managed and well-qualified products produced in international level. And the last one is potential for implementation challenge. It's difficult to implement these homegrown economic agendas due to different factors or shortage of different resources. Now let's see the central objectives of the homegrown economic reform. The central objectives of the homegrown economic reform are sustaining rapid growth, increasing or boosting the economy, and the other one is maintaining stable macroeconomic environment. Stable macroeconomic environment is occurred when there is a control in inflation, when there is a control in the trade deficit, when there is a control in the public deficit or the budget deficit, and if it is possible to reduce the level of unemployment in an economy, then the economy can maintain macroeconomic stabilities. Creating adequate and sustainable job opportunities is the other objective of the homegrown economic reform in Ethiopia. The economic reforms are being translated into action through policy that enhances the supply side of the economy by increasing the aggregate supply of the economy. Then these reforms are expected to increase productivity of Ethiopian economy. The main aim and focus on the homegrown economic reform is the enhancement of productivity and competitiveness of the overall economy and a gradual transition from public to private sector-led growth. From the previous regimes, most of the economy is owned and controlled by the public sector, or government's role in an economy was too large in Ethiopian economy. But this homegrown economy is supposed to give priority for the control and ownership of the private sectors, or participation of the private sector in Ethiopian economy. That means it is expected to reduce participation of the government or the public sector in Ethiopian economy. The homegrown economic reform plan is classified into macroeconomic reforms, sectoral reforms, and structural reforms. Let's start the macroeconomic reform. In order to eliminate macroeconomic imbalances or instabilities and create a stable macroeconomy, then the government or the homegrown economic reform plan suggested a strict macroeconomic management. These strict macroeconomic managements are usually designed to curtail aggregate demand when there is macroeconomic imbalance. One of the macroeconomic imbalance is rise in price or inflation. So in order to control inflation, government is expected to curtail aggregate demand. So government can curtail aggregate demand using the contractionary monetary policy and contractionary fiscal policies. The key focus area of the macroeconomic reform plan was the fiscal policy reform, which is a process which is taking place new operational mechanisms, and the fiscal policy is the deliberate manipulation of the government expenditure and government revenue. So, by increasing and reducing government expenditure and by increasing and reducing government revenue or tax, the government can apply a strict macroeconomic policy. So modernizing and enhancing the tax collection capacity in order to increase the amount of tax that is collected by the government in order to make public investments. This is the key focus area in the homegrown economic reform agenda. Proper public expenditure management. There is wastage in management of government expenses and mega projects or development projects. So managing this public expenditure so as to achieve a desired objectives is the other key policy. Strict reform actions in the public debt management. There is external debt that affects the development of Ethiopian economy. There is external debt distress. So managing this public debt is the other key policy measure, and focusing on making the overall tax administration fair, transparent and accountable. Our tax system is in different problems. So in order to avoid these problems, providing a fair tax administration system and the transparent tax administration system and accountable tax administration system, this is the other policy measure. And strict budgets administration and auditing. sometimes there is difficulties in managing the budgets in public enterprises, so managing or auditing these budgets of the administration strictly is the other policy measures that take attention under the homegrown economic reform. Market-oriented financial sector, which is determined by the demand and supply of the financial assets, and this is undertaken through which the financial sector will eventually promote market-based interest rates. The interest rate is determined by the demand and the supply of currencies in banks, and the foreign currency exchange rates. This is also determined by the force of the market. Recently, the Ethiopian government accepted or applied the floating or the flexible exchange rate system, which is an exchange rate system that is determined by the force of the market, by the demand and the supply of currency. So, this market-oriented foreign exchange rates determination is one of the policy measures taken by the homegrown economic reform. Establishing and expanding capital markets. Capital markets means the sales and buying of bonds and stocks and other government securities, and this is also one of the market-oriented financial sector policy. And strengthening the monitoring and regulatory capacity of the National Bank of Ethiopia was the policy that was included in the homegrown economic policy. Improving the diversification of export commodities and then to expand the inflow of foreign currencies. Increasing export will create foreign exchange, and reducing import will reduce the balance of payment deficits. So, this is the other area that take attention in this homegrown economic reform. With regards to external public debts, the macroeconomic reform process emphasized two main aspects, and these are minimizing the commercial external loans by the government and the private sector, commercial loans, searching more for concessional loans than that of the commercial external loans in order to reduce the external debt distress. And the other one is rescheduling, postponing repayments on the existing external public debt is the other solution to reduce external debt distress in the homegrown economic reform. When we see the second one, it is sectoral reforms. Under the sectoral reforms, there are different sectors that get attention under the homegrown economic reform, and these are the agriculture, mining and tourism. First, let's see the agriculture. The aims of the homegrown economic reform, agricultural sector reforms are: first, to improve the role and participation of the private sector in large-scale commercial farms by providing incentives to attract foreign investors and domestic investors to join into the private commercial farms. Boosting agricultural production is the aim of homegrown economic reform, agricultural sector reform. Expansion of small scale and large scale irrigation development to increase productivity of agriculture. Improving supply of agricultural inputs such as modern agricultural inputs such as tractors, combiners, improved seeds, fertilizers and the likes. Enhancing the productivity of livestock rearing or animal husbandry. Protecting the environment and natural resources. When we protect the environment will protect us, and protecting the environment will increase productivity of the agricultural sector. Improving agricultural production methods. There are different methods which can help us to improve productivity of agricultural outputs. So, improving these agricultural production methods is the other aim of the homegrown economic reform in the agricultural sector. Reducing post-harvest loss. Beyond the major problems associated in Ethiopian agriculture. The other problem is the post-harvest loss. So reducing this post-harvest loss will increase productivity of Ethiopian agriculture, and promoting research-based food security systems, promoting import substitution, major agricultural crop production is the other aim of the homegrown economic reform program of the agricultural sector. For instance, we Ethiopians imported wheat for centuries. In order to reduce relying on import of wheat from foreign countries, then by producing these wheat in domestic economy, we can reduce our vulnerability to import wheat. So this is import substitution strategy. Mining is the other sector that get attention in the homegrown economic reform. The existing mining policies and legal framework have been under the reform process so as to create a conducive investment climate and attract a large number of foreign and domestic investors into the subsector in order to boost the minerals that we had, including gold and other precious metals. The particular emphasis have been given to the promotion of geological data and their dissemination for mining investment promotion. The third sector that gets attention in the homegrown economic reform in Ethiopia is tourism, as the subsector has a characterized with high potential for domestic and foreign revenue generation and job creating opportunities. The tourism reform has paid particular attention to improve and expanding tourism destinations. We do have a lot of tourist attraction areas, but the tourism potential is untapped in Ethiopian economy. So expanding these tourism destinations is one of the key areas that the homegrown economic reform focused, and related infrastructure in order to increase productivity of the tourism sector. Increasing productivity of the infrastructure is the main agenda. Infrastructure is the basis for the development of the tourism sector. Infrastructure means road. If there's expansion in road, there's expansion in tourism destinations. If there's expansion in hotel and restaurant services, there is expansion in tourism services. And if there is expansion in the banking and insurance and other financial institutions, then there is expansion in the tourism services. So in order to expand the tourism sector, government has to give attention for the development of infrastructure, as well as improving the role and participation of the private sector. The tourism sector can increase its productivity by increasing the participation of the private sector. So government has to provide incentives for the private sector that are involved in tourism sector. The third component of the homegrown economic reform is structural reforms, and the structural reform focused on structural reform processes include ensuring coordinated transport and logistics services, implementing import substituting development strategy, reforming the investment and job creation landscapes, increasing the role and participation of the private sector in the economy. As I told you earlier, the homegrown economic reform is mainly giving attention on the participation of the private sector than the public sector. So by selling large state-owned enterprises for the private sectors, the involvement of government is reducing, and liberalization of the private sectors is the other policy measure that take attention in the homegrown economic reform. Strengthening Ethiopia's global and regional partnership, promoting free movement of labor, free movement of labor in order to increase productivity or in order to reduce the unemployment rate in an economy. The homegrown economy reform relies on promoting free movement of labor from one place of the country to the other. Promoting the development of civic societies are the other key areas that get attention under the homegrown economic reform. Students, now let me give you exercises. The first question is ensuring coordinated transport and logistics services is A. Macroeconomic reform of homegrown economic reform plan. B. Sectoral reform of homegrown economic reform plan. C. Structural reform of homegrown economic reform plan. D. Macroeconomic reform of DERG. Question number 2. The following are macroeconomic reforms of homegrown economic reform plan except A. Expansion of macroeconomic imbalances. B. Proper public expenditure management. C. Strict reform actions in the public debt management. D. Modernize and enhance tax collection capacity. The third question, the aims of homegrown economic reform, agricultural sector reform is A. To improve the role and participation of the public sector. B. Eliminating small to large scale irrigation development. C. Increasing supply of inputs and finance. D. Degrading the environment and natural resources. Welcome back, students. Now let's do the questions together. The first question is ensuring coordinated transport and logistics services is the structural reform of the homegrown economic reform plan. So the answer is C. The sectoral reform of the homegrown economic reform plan focused on 3 different sectors called agriculture, mining and tourism. Question number 2. The following are macroeconomic reforms of homegrown economic reform plan except A. Expansion of macroeconomic imbalances. This is the answer. Expansion of macroeconomic imbalances is not the macroeconomic reform of homegrown economic reform. Rather, reducing the macroeconomic imbalance is the macroeconomic reform of homegrown economic reform plan. When we see choice B, proper public expenditure management, this was the macroeconomic reform of homegrown economic reform, so it is not the answer because the question is except. C, strict reform actions in the public debt management is macroeconomic reform of homegrown economic reform, so it is not the answer. D, modernize and enhance tax collection capacity. This is the macroeconomic reform of homegrown economic reform plan. So the answer is A. Question number 3. The aims of homegrown economic reform, agricultural sector reform is A. To improve the role and participation of the public sector. No. A is not the answer because the aim of homegrown economic reform, agricultural sector, is not improving the role and participation of the public sector. Rather, it's aimed on increasing the role and participation of the private sector. So A is not the answer. B, eliminating small to large scale irrigation development. This is not the answer because expansion of small scale and large scale irrigation development is the aim of homegrown economic reform, agricultural sector reform. C, increasing supply of inputs and finances. This is the answer. One of the aim of the homegrown economic reform, agricultural sector reform, is increasing supply of inputs and finance. Degrading the environment and natural resources is not the answer, because the plan focused on improving the environment and natural resources. Students, now let's summarize the day's lesson. The 10-year development plan lays a long-term vision of making Ethiopia an African beacon of prosperity, maintaining macroeconomic stability, ensuring rapid and sustainable economic growth, and creating decent jobs are among the objectives of homegrown economic reform. The homegrown economic reform plan is classified into macroeconomic reforms, sectoral reforms, and structural reforms. Students, this was all about the day's lesson. Thank you.